All right. It's coffee chat time. Thank you guys so much for being here. I see you all are dialing in now. It's always so fun every week when we press broadcast. I just love to see all your names flowing in. And those of you that are joining by phone, thank you so much for dialing in. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes because I know it takes a little bit of time to get everyone in and everyone's schedules here in the middle of the day. So thank you so much again for joining us for our 9th installment of Coffee Chat. We've got some awesome people with us today, and I'm really excited to share their stories and who the people are that are with us. So we'll give you just another minute or two to get dialed in, and then we'll get started. So thank you guys for being here. There's also a chat feature here at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to just throw in there where you're dialing in from or joining us from, or if you just want to say hello, or if you've got any questions that you already know of, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A section that is down at the bottom if you have some questions on engagement, but definitely keep using that throughout the chat. But if you just want to say a quick hello or where you're dialing in from, feel free to put that in the chat below. All right. So thank you all for joining us today. As I said, this is our 9th coffee chat, and we are so excited to have a couple of amazing women with us today. But before we get into talking about them and our topic, I always love to just give, for those of you who've never joined before, just a little bit of background on us. I'm Robert Fowler. I'm the co-founder and CCO of CatalystCreativ. And CatalystCreativ is a community design agency focused on experiences using our proprietary method called the 7th Level Engagement Framework. We started just about 8 years ago, and we've been a fully remote team since day one. So if you've missed any of our past calls, we've had some amazing speakers and some amazing topics, and we have all of those recordings on our site. So just check out the Coffee Chat page, or you can send us an email. There's an address on your screen, which is coffee@catalystcreativ.com, and we'll make sure to send you those recordings. And a couple housekeeping items. As we said, there's a chat below. We'd love to hear where you're dialing in from. So if you just want to say hello from wherever you are. For those of you on Zoom, continue to use the Q&A feature at the bottom. And if you have a question and you're not on Zoom and you've dialed in by phone, you can email any questions to coffee@CatalystCreativ, and we'll make sure to get Julie and Morgan and myself to answer those questions. So anyway, we're going to get started now. I love to just sort of tell everyone, if you don't mind, just like, we do this as a call instead of a video because we know now after 10 to 12 weeks of remote work that Zoom can be a little bit exhausting. So we just love to give people the opportunity to sit back and close their eyes. If you're on the East Coast and you're prepping your lunch and you're enjoying that during this time, that's awesome as well. But really just kind of take some time for yourself to settle in and listen. You're all muted. No one's gonna see your screen, so don't worry about that. But today we wanted to talk about engagement. And engagement is something that Catalyst has been talking about really for the last 8 years. And this is going to be a 2-part series. So we have another segment about engagement next week. But because this topic is so near and dear to our hearts, we actually wrote a book about it called The 7th Level, as I mentioned before. And there's so many parts and levels to engagement that it actually required a book. And engagement's been at the core of everything we do since we started in downtown Las Vegas with our first project, which was Catalyst Week, which I see a few of you on the call list here attended those over the first 2 years when we first started. But I could go on and on about how we were developing an engagement framework. We really didn't even know that we were, but we kind of did because Amanda, our co-founder, wrote her thesis on the 7th level. But it would take me hours to go into all that. So today's primary focus will be on employee engagement. And before we introduce them and dive deeper, I kind of wanted to try to define what engagement is. It's because it's really become such a buzzy trend word over the last few years. And we're talking about engagement in many, many different ways. So as I was doing a little bit of research for this call, I looked around to see how others define engagement, and specifically employment engagement. This one particular definition really stuck out to me. and that is employment engagement is the strength of the mental and emotional connection employees feel to their places of work. So I'll say that one again because I think it really will help define the talk that we're going to have today. And that's that employment engagement is the strength of the mental and emotional connection employees feel toward their places of work. So, but what does that really even mean? It's not very concrete. And how do you measure mental and emotional connection? I mean, that's all influenced by so many factors, but it turns out that you can measure it. And anyone who on here who's a leader or who has a business or has the ability, you really should. Gallup research shows that organizations with highly engaged employees have 17% higher productivity and 21% higher profitability. So the bottom line, engaged employees work harder and they tend to stay longer. But you can't engage employees if you don't understand what engaging or disengaging them in the first place really is. So measuring an employment engagement helps you to gain insights into what your employees think your organization does well, and also, where there's some areas to improve. So this can be done in a few ways. Obviously, you can do surveys, you can do one-on-ones, you can do stay or exit research, and those are just a few of the ways that you can. But you can also do it. You can also look at how to increase engagement. And the first step really is in measuring. So for an employee to be engaged, they need to believe that the organization generally cares about them. We've all been in businesses or organizations or jobs where we don't feel like we're really valued or that our employer really cares. But when a leader shows that they care about their team, employees tend to respond with increased loyalty and commitment to the team and organization. And by committing to measuring and improving engagement, you're showing employees that you generally care about their well-being, and really that you're making a conscious effort to ensure that they're happy at their work. And doing those things alone sometimes is enough to make people feel engaged, at least in the short term. So an important note, if you measure, you have to be ready to act. So many organizations review the results of a survey, but then they don't do anything with them. We've all seen this. We've all experienced it. We've all taken a survey, and then where does that research go? So there's really nothing worse than asking your employees for their opinion and then not doing anything with their feedback. So if you want to conduct an engagement survey, just be ready to act. So communicate the results. If you've conducted a survey, pick a few things and actually improve on them. And then if you need to repeat the process again, you probably should again and again, maybe a few months later. So enough about all that from me. Hopefully now you understand what we're going to be talking about today, but I have two experts on the call with us who are going to we just barely scratched the surface, who are going to take us on a much deeper dive. And our first guest is Julie Choi. Julie is the founder of Pointer and an award-winning CEO. She built one of the most successful leadership and talent advisory firms in the US, Choi & Burns, now known as CBK Partners. Julie is an innovative champion of the people agenda driving the business agenda. She's catalyzed companies to achieve monumental growth impacting shareholders' value. And she's really dedicated to redefining the way companies value authenticity and inspire talent. Julie's also a former concert pianist, and she received her bachelor's and master's degree in piano performance from Juilliard in New York. And then our next guest is Morgan Rossi. Morgan is a key account manager at LinkedIn and advises companies on their talent acquisitions, workforce planning, and employer branding strategy. At LinkedIn, she also serves as the Women at LinkedIn Communications Lead and as LinkedIn's New York City Employee Charity Liaison. Prior to joining LinkedIn 4 years ago, Morgan was with Xerox for 6 years. And as you all probably know, LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network on the internet with over 575 million members. Morgan, if I got that wrong and the number is actually larger, you can correct me as we get into these calls. So let's jump right in right now. I've got a couple questions for our panelists, but I definitely want to hear from you all and the questions that you have for them. So I think that the first one, only because we've been talking so much about remote work and the importance of engagement with remote work, I'd love to hear from you, Julie. How has it been leading a team, working with a remote team, leading a team as a CEO for almost the last 3 months?
Okay. I would say that's a loaded question. I think that at the 3rd week mark, I made a determination. I actually had a phone call with a fellow entrepreneurial leader Julie Fauble, and she runs a really cool real estate tech startup. And that call with Julie just made me shift my thinking. She just came out of this darkness with so much optimism. And I just flipped a switch. I'm naturally optimistic, but it was scary. And I'm tired of talking about how scary it is, because we have to be working, right? We have to be working, and we have to provide work and fuel the economy. And so I would say that what it's been like, it's certainly been a roller coaster, as is for everybody, but it's been just an eye opener. And who do you want to be? Like, what is this new reality? Who are you going to be in this? And how will people turn to you? And I find that what I'm doing is, we're all oversharing, we're all over communicating. The well of empathy runs dry, and even for people who naturally are empathetic. And I find that the key thing is really sharing vulnerability. And I feel that is just, it's like magic. And that sharing vulnerability, it's not just, I'm scared, I'm this and what have you, but it's, how'd I do on that call? I'm working on my Zoom presentation and don't feel I killed it on this one, or what am I trying to achieve? And just collaborating with the teams in a way that's very intimate and vulnerable and personal. Just we have to reach beyond the screen to make it feel that way, to have that sense of connectedness.
I love
That's what I've been learning and working on.
Absolutely. I love that. Morgan, what about for you? How has it been working remote for the last couple months?
It's an adjustment. I work for an internet company, so I feel fortunate that we were already pretty set up to be able to accommodate the change that happened, although it is very different not being able to see my friends and colleagues in the Empire State Building every day anymore, where my office is. That being said, it has been super interesting just from my point of view, working for a company that is actually very engaged in how to make sure people around the world have the ability to be a better remote worker. Actually, since January 2020, I can tell you that remote working, just literally typing that into LinkedIn and trying to look for courses on how to be a better remote worker, how to be able to lead without burnout, things like that. Just that phrase, remote working, has tripled in our search inquiry. So it's been interesting to kind of be leading that change, not just internally at our own company, but as we engage with clients and other corporations as well, to actually show up and lead by example and kind of be able to talk through some of those different tactics, et cetera. So it's been a roller coaster for everyone, of course, but it's also been very rewarding to be able to be sort of a trusted advisor with so many companies that might not have been quite as well set up compared to a company like LinkedIn, and kind of how our workforce was able to be so flexible and malleable during this time. So I feel very fortunate to be having those conversations.
I love that. Yeah. So we actually drove, I've been either between New York or Long Island for the last 10 weeks. And actually on Saturday, we actually drove down to Tennessee. So we passed through, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, like all the way down to Tennessee. And I think that, as someone who's been living in New York, sort of the epicenter of all of this, I really got to see on this 10-hour drive, passing through all these states, and now having spent a few days in Knoxville, Tennessee, it's crazy to be here to see how different the world is here, and the world in those states that I drove through compared to what we've experienced in New York. And I love seeing, where everyone is calling in from, from Florida to Connecticut to California and Texas. It's great because we've all had a different experience in this. And I think that maybe it's a little bit of my fault, but in the past, I've sort of, on these coffee chats especially, I think I've been giving a little bit too much perspective, possibly of what I had been experiencing just in New York. And there's a lot of people who haven't had a similar experience. And for a company like, you know, especially for like LinkedIn, you guys have employees all over the world, probably in every state and every city. And, you know, everyone is experiencing something different. So I kind of want to keep that in mind today while we're talking about engagement, because, you know, when you're all in the Empire State Building at your office, or Julie in your office, which I've been to on the West Side, or, you know, at our WeWorks that we worked at Catalyst, the experience is all different. And I think that, you know, it's very hard to have one blanket statement when you have employees in many different locations, because everyone's having a different experience. You know, the experience in New York of having to walk out wearing a mask and wearing gloves, and our building won't even let you in the elevator or through the front door unless you have on a mask. And here in Tennessee, you know, people are going to restaurants, and people are, you know, at the grocery store without masks and gloves, and not really living in that, from that fear spot. So I think that when we talk through some of these things today, it's interesting to be thinking about it in all perspectives, that we are all going through this, but it's a little bit different. So I'd love to ask you, Morgan, like, what does engagement mean to you? Like, how do you define and measure engagement at LinkedIn or with your clients?
Well, I do personally, not to just make a plug for everyone over at your company, but I have read the 7th Level Believer in it. I had my team read it as well. So I do love your definition, actually, the direct alignment of personal beliefs that lead to loyalty and action without incentive. So I do have to say, I love that. At LinkedIn, though, I think we try to figure out a way to really measure that. We know that kind of the world of people just heading to work and showing up for their job, the world has changed. People are so much more interconnected, inspired, choose to go on a platform like LinkedIn because it's aspirational, and they really want to show up for work now if they feel like they're truly engaged with that company. So for me, engagement, it's a little bit different. I don't really feel like employees just work for a company anymore. They really work for the people. They work for the message, the vision, et cetera, that they're setting out to do. And so from my personal perspective, I guess this is a little different than LinkedIn. I feel like employee engagement really kind of sits with whether it's the leader of the organization or the people that you're choosing to engage with and have that leadership surrounding you. That's really what's going to end up making you more productive and produce some of that customer loyalty, employee retention, profits, everything that ultimately we're trying to measure. So it's kind of a mix, I guess, of the LinkedIn definition and my personal definition.
Sure. Julie, what about for you?
You know, it's so, you know, engagement, like you said, is very popular now. And it starts with, it's hard to measure. It's easy to measure and hard to measure. What's easy to measure is you take a survey. And then, like you said, then what are you going to do with it? And that makes people feel like we've implemented a program and we have 90% participation and people have answered questions. But in the business that I've been in, I've dealt with the people challenge with companies where this is everything. They're not making widgets. It's all driven by the people they have on their teams. And the most successful leaders and emerging leaders lead with an open mind. They lead with genuine interest in the person in front of them, the group in front of them, or the community that they've built as part of the culture. And it's really a talent and a gift. And most companies don't have a lot of people like this. And thus, you know, therein lies the nature of leadership. But what it is that these people do, whether you're senior at the top of the house or you're emerging, is you can put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that's really a mindset. You know, it's a mindset that, as you referenced before, without incentive, without agenda, the interest to know a person. And that to me is the ultimate in engagement. And you can measure that by ultimately your voluntary turnover, which is costs the companies in this country, trillions of dollars, or you all can also address it like at the beginning of the journey. And because your culture has that mindset. And that's where all this talk about authenticity and I want to be myself and all the best companies, but that's really intangible. It's very, very hard to actualize because it's really difficult to know a person. It takes time, it takes opportunity, spontaneity, organic conversation, the right mindset, all of that. And so to me, engagement is not, it's not a thing you measure, but it's really a lifestyle, a mindset, and it's something that happens literally between people. It takes two to make that happen. And that, from my experience in dealing in these matters, is why people stay. It's why they thrive. It's why they don't want to leave. And I know that with the labor situation that it is, we went from, there's too much supply, but yet companies are the really forward-leaning companies really get how essential this is. And it's what, what Morgan's referenced and what you referenced earlier.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, there's definitely some nuggets there. And what I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but sort of since you brought it up, I'm curious your thoughts, Julie, of with so many people unemployed, what advice would you give to people right now who are looking for jobs to kind of, you talked about it from the business side, but what about from the individual side? Any tips for how they can distinguish themselves or differentiate themselves to make sure they're, like their light shines through?
Oh yeah, I definitely got views on that. Make it simple. There is the this owning your narrative, right? But that's, oversaid. It's really, why are you relevant? And what is it about you that makes you compelling? Okay, so that's deep, deep thought. And I think there are three ways, three spheres. When people are thinking about looking for a job, there's also a product of the system. The system, unfortunately, is very literal. This is the job, these are the skills, we need these skills. And now we have all kinds of technology to make it even easier for companies to look at more and more people based on that. But as anyone knows, in running a team, a business, hiring and having to fire, it's really the intangibles that make someone successful, that makes them additive to the culture, that makes them thrive. And so when you look at when someone is trying to figure out how are they going to be relevant in the new reality, either because they're looking for a job or they're unhappy, there's the what of what you've done. That's the black and white. And that's really looking backwards. That's in the rear view mirror, but that in and of itself, what are the takeaways of the what? Then of the what's notable about your what? And the what's what you've done. What's notable? What's the context? Make it easy for the person on the other side to have the takeaway. How are they going to know the idiosyncrasies of the situation you were in? Most people are bad at interviewing, just bad. They're asking questions that they think they should ask. Right. And it's very one way. It's very much, tell me the answer I'd like to hear. And so they're lazy for the most part. They're not asking questions that really illuminate or allow you to illuminate who you are. And so really you should be answering the question in the way that the question should have been asked.
Right.
But no one knows you as well as you should know yourself. So there's the what did I do, which is the black and white, product manager, this and that. And then what's notable? What was notable about that situation that person, it would put it into context. This was a never before created role. It was the brainchild of the CEO, whatever the context was. And then going further, why should anybody care? Why is it relevant? Who would care about the what in your context? And is it the base of people that you know as a result of that? Is it a particular way of dealing with a problem, a crisis, a situation that is applicable to any company? I'll give you an example. I was speaking to someone pretty senior at a big Wall Street firm, and she runs a big business, and she hates her job. So that's effectively like looking for a job, right? But you're not actually looking. And I said to her, I said, look, in this market environment, for you to find a different job in a different world, not going to happen. It's going to be very hard. And what you can control is your mindset. You can control the purview, your perspective on your situation. I said, use the next 18 months, 24 months to innovate. You're in this situation where you can take your influence and your responsibilities and change the status quo, change how, and use it as a petri dish, a lab to implement the changes you've always wanted to change. And then that will allow you to transcend the industry that you're in so that it's more applicable to other industries. So again, it's really about owning, why do you matter? And not allowing the system to just say, you don't have these skills. Because the reality is the jobs out there, and Morgan knows all about this. There's millions of jobs and skills that need to be filled and people can't fill it. So what are we going to do? We've got to tap into what is potential. What is it that someone can bring to something that's not actually on the resume?
I love that. I love it so much. And Morgan, she teed you up perfect. So I'd love to know your I'd love to know your thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you said so many great things there, Julie, and love how you're kind of challenging people in such unprecedented times to try and rethink of or think through how they could maybe reinvent themselves at this time. Think about what's really your core values, what's really your core value that you can bring to someone else. How can you drive that? However, the world is really, really different right now compared to what it looked like 6 months ago. And I know the conversations that I'm having with even the clients that I'm working with as they're trying to navigate whether they have to go through layoffs or furloughs or skill redeployment, et cetera. It's happening at both ends, both from the individual who's now trying to come up with a new path, carve that new path, but also companies as well as they start to think through, how can we play a bigger part in this as well? So let me just give you a couple stats on this call, because I think most people who are thinking about employee engagement and kind of how that relates to unemployment right now might find this interesting. As expected, job losses and the unemployment rate, they were up nearly 15% just a few weeks ago, which when we looked back at the numbers, that's the highest monthly numbers that's been reported since 1948.
Wow.
So we really are I know everyone feels like, the word unprecedented is an overused word, and perhaps it is, but it's probably the most descriptive. It's been since 1948 that we've experienced anything like this. And yet, I think maybe a glimmer of hope is we are still recognizing a material bottoming out in hiring in just mid to late April, meaning that the hiring rate hasn't actually declined any further in May, which should show some sense of stabilization. So I don't know, perhaps the worst is behind us. However, this is still paired with, if we look at the overall workforce confidence index, that's indicating this anticipation of a further drop in personal spending over the next 6 months. So even though we can kind of shout from the rooftops, hey, things are going to get better. Hey, this is a chance for you to kind of think about what your core value is and how you might be able to bring that to a new organization. We can kind of see with that workforce confidence index that people are still fearful. They're still fearful they're not going to be able to find a new job over the next 6 months. That's why personal spending is down. So when I think about it, and if I were to give advice to, and I have, to friends of mine that are unemployed and having more and more conversations with, hey, can you take this phone call with someone who's trying to figure out what of their skills might be, could be redeployable somewhere else, or what really are those common skills within a new organization. The first thing I say is, you being unemployed doesn't mean that you're not any valuable than the person that they kept or someone else with a like job at another company. There's just a lot of circumstance that's been out of everyone's control right now. So going into interviews, opportunities with, looking at those opportunities with a new level of gratitude for what you were able to accomplish in your last role, I think that's super important. And I think it's also really important to remember as you are starting to look for, oh my gosh, I'm starting over, like where do I even start? Remember that the world right now, compared to 1948, our world is a much more connected place. And yes, so much of it is just the rise of the internet in general. It's now just sheer knowledge, sheer information is so much more ubiquitous, so much more available. And companies like LinkedIn, like other social platforms, make it so much easier to connect with everyone else. And those human interactions, to Julie's point, like being able to really describe who you are, what matters about you, why you deserve to be there. You now have so many of these people who are unemployed now compared to 1948, they have the platform to really say and communicate what those things are. And I think that's really important to remember, that you have an opportunity here. And finally, when you're kind of thinking through that, then if it were me in that position, I would think through, okay, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. Here's the time to really dig deep in myself, in the opportunity that could exist. Look for those human connections, look for some of that interconnectedness that I'm going to need right now, because I'm going to probably have to ask for help, ask for people's time, that non-renewable resource, to learn more about what else is out there. And my biggest piece of advice then is, you're going to have a lot of people asking for things, asking for people's time. I would also think through what you can offer in return. Maybe it's you connecting the person whose time you're asking for to someone else. Maybe it's a perspective that you can offer, etc. But the world is really based on human connection. At the end of the day, like, people want to help people. I really believe that. There's some goodness here, even when things seem so negative.
Right.
And you know,
and we've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, not to make it too much of a plug for LinkedIn, but that's what the platform is built for. Like, use things like that to reach out and make sure that not just that your voice is heard, but you're trying to have meaningful engagement with the people you're asking help for, and see how else you can help them in return. That would be.
Well, and I know, Morgan, you advise, you know, a lot of Fortune 100 companies, you know, the big players out there that are, you know, sort of constantly hiring a lot of people in tech. I'm curious, you know, and then there's a couple other more personal questions, and we've had a few questions that have come via email, and continue adding them here. I want to make sure that we get to them as well. But how are you advising your clients and assisting them right now during the workplace when it comes to hiring? Like, any couple tips or anything in case there's people on the call who are looking to hire? What advice, maybe one or two things that you're giving to your clients?
There's really one singular focus, and I hope some of my clients are on the call so they know that I'm not just giving them this, you know, the same spiel around the call, but I really believe this is, there is nothing more important than having a voice right now as an organization. So your employer brand, your talent brand, there is truly nothing that is going to be more important than the companies who choose to have a voice during this time. They're the ones that are choosing to step up and be a leader. And if you think about it, there's just been so much press lately for how companies are dealing with the crisis, treating their employees. And for the first time, the way that you treat your employees today, that's front page news. That's front page news more than almost anything else any other company is doing right now. And so your employer brand is now actually becoming your entire company brand in times like today. So as you think about, to bring it back to employee engagement, which is, I know why most people join this call, how you're treating your employees right now is so critical. That should be your first focus. We want to make sure that we're human first. If we have to have layoffs, we're doing it in a respectful manner. We're engaging companies that provide things like transition and outplacement services. We're thinking about all of those things and trying to be human first. But then on the other side of it is, it's not to be braggadocious or egotistical, but you need to tell the world what you're doing and lead by example. If people don't realize all of the great work that you're doing to keep your employees engaged and keep their mental health in line, all of those things, then you can't be a global leader for others. And those are the companies right now that people, whether they're unemployed or not, those are the companies that they're looking to as leaders and think, wow, I really want to be a part of that culture one day. I want to work for a leader like that.
Yeah.
That's how I would advise companies to think about it.
Actually, Morgan, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I find that clients are falling to three ends of the spectrum or a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
On the left, many companies it's fear. And that's the human nature, right? It's fear, it's paralysis and so forth. And I thought that was really scary in the first few weeks. But then what happens is leadership starts to define itself. And then there's the practical leader. Okay, this is a new reality. So I'm only going to do this one or two things because it's critical, because this is all I know. And a lot of people fall into that range. And then there are, as you point out, the real distinctive lead. Their culture is so strong, and they just get it that this is a time to double down on whatever it was. It might have been the difficulties on the diversity front, on a particular business that they were not able to really actualize just because it was just so competitive. And so you really start to see leadership. And I've seen this now with CEOs of businesses and companies where this is our time to change everything. It's now, we're all equidistant because of the video screen. Mm-hmm. And it's democratized. It's democratizing, right? The pain is just spread out for everybody. And so we're all the same distance from the screen. And so for us at Pointer, we're focused, and this is pre-COVID, happens to be very relevant now, but about elevating the colleague experience. And what that is companies are using our Pointer to scale social bonding and personalize that interaction, because their brand is all about the whole person. And so it's software that's accelerating relationship building in the workplace. And then it actualizes this mindset that I was talking about before. And to what Morgan was saying earlier, companies need to signal their culture. And the culture is not just words, and it's tested now, and being tested now during the time going forward, which is probably the new normal. And that culture is about embracing what makes each of us who we are. And those diverse perspective is not a luxury. It's not a diversity and inclusion initiative. It's reality. And it's very, very hard to be real at work. And even harder now in this new world that we're in. And so allowing companies, enabling them to tap into a way for trust that happens between people, that is your culture, that's your brand. And that affects productivity and longevity and why people thrive and so forth.
For sure. Well, we are starting to get so many questions, and I love it. And I do want to say that we typically schedule these calls only until 12:45, but we can continue going a few minutes past that because I want to make sure that we can get all of these questions answered. And so what I'll do is Morgan and Julie, for a few of these questions, just based on knowing both of you, we'll kind of direct them to you, and just kind of keep in mind the time frame that we have, because I know that you guys could both expand on these for a long time, but I want to make sure we get to everyone. So George asked via email, how did they in practicality lead with the human in mind? And I think this is a great question for you, Julie. So how do you lead with the human in mind, and how do you lead with general empathy in mind without power being at the forefront?
A great question. You leave your own expectations to the side. You lead in a way that you're really about wanting to know about the other person. And as I referenced earlier, it's not a question that comes from the point of view of I'm your teammate, I'm your boss, I'm your this, I'm your that. It's really in the spirit of someone who is genuinely interested in that person. And it's really the power of open-ended questions. Open-ended questions where there's no right answer. You just really want to know. Just think about it. If you ask somebody, how are you doing? What are they going to say? It sucks today? I mean, they're going to say, yeah, I'm fine. But what was the point of that question? The question is, you know, I've got someone on my team who's been fasting for a month. And I'm not going to ask, how you doing? I'm going to say, how hard is that? Right? I mean, you gotta think about when the power of inquiry. And I was just, Robert, I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you how much I was inspired by the InQ chat. It's literally a post-it on my desk to continually listen to him. And it's really this kind of inquiry that is not driven by your own needs. That's how you get to humanizing the interaction between people. It's like leading from the other person's point of view.
I love that. Yeah. And speaking of NQ, he's so incredible. When he, I have his book and I've read a bit of it, but I've now switched to the audio version because I could just listen. There's something about, as we were talking about this call before, you know, when we were doing the practice just ahead of time, there's something about just the power of words and being able to just kind of close your eyes and listen and not feel like you have to be focused on video or not feel like you have to be, you know, looking at, you know, how someone else is reacting. And I think that's the beauty of NQ is that he brings to our forefront, he makes us think about these things as he's speaking. And I think having a bit more compassion and a little bit more, maybe even if you have to prep a little bit more, like you said, Julie, just to kind of ask the right questions instead of just, you know, your first time talking to someone, how's everyone doing? You know, like we all have answered the same questions and we all are feeling different things right now. So I think that that was some amazing advice. Morgan, we have a question from Alexa. While we're focused on sustaining current employee engagement, how are recruiters looking forward to rebuild when hiring? So curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. It is a hot topic among all of my clients across various industries right now. And I'd say the number one thing that we're exploring is an overall redeployment of skills. I think it's a huge opportunity right now. And actually everything that Julie said earlier around advice she would give to someone that's unemployed, I think what we're doing is trying to urge our clients to put themselves in the shoes of someone that realizes that some of their skills might be not necessarily as required at this time, i.e. so many companies are on hiring freezes or so many companies are not recruiting at the same level that they were before. Companies hopefully will start to grow more over the next couple of months, but at the time there's a bit of a pause. And that's been one of the number one things that we've been discussing, that a redeployment of those skills, having people actually go through and do skill assessments, skill charts of themselves, has been huge. It's been really giving people the opportunity to actually work with, whether it's an outside agency or trying to develop their own framework. What is it that you can do to kind of do your own internal skills assessment? People that were really good in one area of the business, they might have certain technical skills, they might have certain soft skills as well. Is there a learning and development opportunity to transfer them into a new part of the business that they could also continue to thrive and add value? And we've been focused on that quite a bit to try and prevent furloughs, layoffs, things of that nature, and at least to hold off for as long as possible. So I'd say that's number one. And then overall for recruitment in the future, again, I will go back to the employer branding piece that I spoke about earlier. We are really highly suggesting that talent acquisition groups they're partnering even closer with their marketing and comms teams than they ever have before. companies won't be remembered for sitting on the sidelines during a time of crisis. So
for sure.
going quiet is not a strategy for long-term success. So whether it's the larger brand making sure that they are showing up and letting people know that the tree fell in the forest in a broader way, or it's the recruiters themselves that even when there's not a role that's necessarily open for employment at the moment, that they're continuing to reach out, establish those relationships, human connections, and making sure that they're pipelining for the top talent. We all know people that were affected, unfortunately, by everything that's going on, and that has nothing to do with whether or not they were a great value add to the workforce. So if anything, I'm telling recruiters, this is an amazing opportunity to actually be able to get on the phone with some of that top talent that probably would have been really hard to get a moment of their time before.
For sure. I know it's 12:46, so if some of you have to drop off, we totally understand. But if you can stay, please stay, because there's still some really awesome questions for Julie and Morgan. Next week, we'll have Scott Gould, who's a UK-based author, who's going to be having a conversation with our own Amanda Slavin about the 7th level. So you'll definitely want to join in for next week's coffee chat, same place, same time here. So if you haven't registered for that, please be sure to do so. But I want to get back to a few more of these questions. Morgan and Julie, if you guys have a couple more minutes, I'd love to get your thoughts on these. So I think that I like this one, and I'm curious, Julie, your thoughts, because you've been in this space for a long time. And the question is, with unemployment so high, employers seem to have a significant upper hand in the hiring dynamic. Do you envision working conditions for workers worsening as a result, since people will be less likely to turn down an offer or quit a job they have out of the fear that they won't be able to find another one for a while?
Wow. It's like on the spectrum of human nature, right? So companies that where their culture is very people-centric, and they don't view it as an upper hand, are going to thrive, and as Morgan indicated, their brands are going to will benefit from that. I think companies that this is going to be a time, there's just a supply, there's too much supply everywhere, all kinds of things, companies that shouldn't be around, and all of that. And so the underpinning of these conditions will depend on how leadership determines. I think that, I've chosen to work with companies where they don't think of other people as a number, because if you do, that it shows in your performance. And so the underpinning of all of this is really a relationship centric focus. And I think that I can't predict the number of jobs that'll come out of this and so forth, but high performance and high connectivity, it's very mutual. There's a mutuality to that, and that affects productivity. And so that mutuality will be the foundation of success going forward. And I think that everyone's going to have to do more with less. And we're going to get to a point where I think it normalizes a bit, because you can't stand still from a human capital point of view.
Sure.
You can't stand still, no matter what the market is. And I've been through crises before.
Yeah.
You've got to act. You've got to have the right person, or you've got to promote the right person, or you've got to upskill your team. You've got to keep moving forward. And, it's innovation and culture that are going to be the drivers of that for success.
I love that. Yeah, for sure. Another question for you, Morgan, is, Morgan, you talked about how you treat your employees can become front page news right now. Do you have any favorite journalists or outlets who are covering this topic especially well?
Outlets as in companies, or
outlets as like to find out. I think the question refers to, talking about how companies are treating their employees. Like, is there a way, maybe it's media outlets or any journalist or any, maybe it's like anyone on LinkedIn that you follow or something, who are covering companies that are treating their employees well. kind of how are you finding out who's doing that well?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been following LinkedIn has a whole as a whole group of economists that work for LinkedIn that are constantly looking through the market, making predictions on how certain companies might thrive or not thrive based on some of their communications. So I would suggest following either our chief economist, Karen Kimbrough, on LinkedIn, or anyone in her department. You'll be able to see them all there. But that's been wildly interesting to see a comparison of not just the qualitative information as companies continue to kind of talk about their employer brand in line with their normal brands, but they're also doing some really interesting work on looking at the workforce index confidence scores, being able to push out workforce reports each month with kind of real-time updates on what's happening in the global economy. So I would highly recommend reading those.
Great. Love that. Ellen asked via email, I find sharing personal stories to communicate business messages to be effective, and I'm curious if you've had similar experience. Julie, your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure.
I knew you would go for that one.
Look, it's a human, the human experience, right? We love stories.
Yeah.
And people, the system doesn't really ask people to share what they really care about. It's just the interview process. You know, I've lived through it. It's more people are driven by their own, like, okay, tell me, are you good at this? Can you do that? Can you, whatever, you know, in that. How do you feel about the company? Is your boss? It's always through that lens for the most part. And going back to, you know, so when you ask, give someone permission to share, like invite them to share, it's really easy, because what happens is people just open up, and then you have this rich treasure trove through which you can get to know the person, build a relationship, share vulnerability, all those kind of touchy-feely things but you're doing it all day long. Think of it. Every one of you is out there building a relationship with someone. It's with your school, a school colleague, a colleague, a boss, a friend, a running partner. You never start with the agenda. You always focus on understanding, like, what's this person about? You're trying to figure that out. We're all doing it in every advantage of our life. And I'm a huge believer that bringing that to work as part of the dynamic of work is really what's going to enable people to perform incredibly well, because they can feel that they can bring their best self to work, that they can throw out that crazy idea because they know they know that they belong and that they're being heard. And then thus collaboration and productivity and all that good stuff that you want to measure in terms of company performance and results, that's that underpinning. So going back to the earlier question, it's just about kind of giving it to the other person to allow them to share these elements of their story, little leitmotifs, and then they sparkle, and then they shine, and then therein lies, trust,
Yep.
which is really the future of work.
Absolutely. Speaking of the future of work, and I don't know if either of you have any insider thoughts on this, the last question that we have here, is there any sort of push from the private sector for the reinstatement of federal job programs like the WPA? It seems like if more people are working and have disposable income, that would benefit all industries. So curious, neither of you may have had many thoughts or even thought about that, but if Morgan or Julie, either of you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can jump in first. I think when a crisis strikes, there's a lot of creative ways we can start thinking about how to create economic opportunity, for one, and then two, put money back into people's pockets. Both are important and both are cyclical. However, I do think that there is a wide variety of predictions that sit out there right now. Some of them that are more focused on the enablement of technology and how that partnership with humans is really going to unfold as kind of a reaction to this. And programs like that are some of the kind of hot topics as well that I'm speaking about with my companies. Is there, some of my clients feel like these programs could create, some people feel like there's risk, like it wouldn't be a good thing, i.e. there's less control within the private sector to be able to lead the type of change and direction they want, i.e. great employer engagement programs, leadership development, et cetera. That's on one side. The other side feels like the more aid, the more help, the more reason we could have programs to create more economic opportunity, the better the economy will perform, and then everyone will be happy. So I'm taking a non-stance on that, but equally curious to see how things fold out. And it's very interesting to see how certain industries are going to be trying to get more involved in advocating for programs like that over the next, just simply over the next 6 months, let alone in the future. So
Sure.
Definitely a great question.
All right, our last question comes from Betty. And Julie, I'm going to ask your thoughts, and then maybe you can answer this one pretty quickly. And then I want to make sure to give you guys a minute or so for closing thoughts. And if there was anything that you wanted to tell our callers today that you didn't get to. But basically, Betty's question is talking about the interview process and how it needs to change someday. It's hard knowing a candidate's skills from asking questions in a few hours. They can give you what you want to hear, as you said, Julie. And I'm referring to the more experienced workforce. How many companies and nonprofit organizations provide skill-based testing during the interview process? Or any thoughts that you have just about, any thoughts that you have, Julie, about that?
Sure. I think that the technology runs the gamut of, in work tech, that is, just being literal and looking at, the resume bots, looking at whether or not you have the keyword based on the job description, to all the way to all kinds of gamified neuropsych testing. And it's, it's a new world, right? And it's challenging to be able to have a great interview now that's being very commonly used, one-sided video interviewing. Or skills-based testing. And so a lot of it's dehumanizing. And that's the challenge. You're going to have to go through the gauntlet on that. And that's just, it's happening. And it's because companies are dealing with huge volumes. And until they start to prioritize quality over quantity, that's the new reality. Yep. And so getting past that, and when you do get to a real person, as I referenced earlier, being able to be facile on yourself. Don't be reactive. Don't wait for someone to ask you a question you're hoping. Answer the questions, answer the responses, shape the conversation in a dynamic way because you've done your research, and most importantly, you've done this self-exploration on yourself. You're nimble, you're like a boxer in a boxing ring about how your facility and the way you can contribute to culture without being scripted. So that's my advice on that.
I love that. Well, thank you both so much for being with us. Any final 30-second thoughts on engagement or employee engagement or anything, any just sort of closing thoughts? Morgan, you want to take a couple seconds?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to employee engagement, especially in a remote world, my closing thoughts are you personally have the ability to make a difference there. So much of right now is about human connection. It's about those little phone calls to reach out and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. And one of my favorite quotes that came from a previous mentor of mine that I've really been trying to practice every day is that, especially in situations like this, leadership is taken, it's not given. Everyone has the ability to step up, be a leader, have meaningful engagement with their peers, with their colleagues, friends, family, clients, whoever it may be. And this is your perfect opportunity to really show that.
I love it. Julie?
Morgan, that's really, really good. I will end with the nature of personal capital, and personal capital is earned, as Morgan referenced. And I think the way each one of us can do that is about embracing all different points of view and really making it on a personal level. So that kind of all the programs that people care about that are about diversity and this and that and so forth, it's making it real. It's living it, walking the walk. So that's what I would say. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. We'll be sending out the follow-up. I know Morgan's going to provide us some stats from LinkedIn, and we'll follow up and share the recording of this in case there was any little nuggets that you missed. You can catch those in the recap. And thank you all so much for joining us for our coffee chats. As I always say, try to take a little bit of time for yourself, get outside and take a walk. Remote work can become especially daunting when at 8:00 p.m. you realize you haven't eaten anything or got out of your pajamas yet. So take some time for self-care, and thanks so much for joining us. And a huge thanks to you, Julie and Morgan. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.